Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. We're back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Raw Reaction series, the show in which we react to the latest Arsenal news, the latest Arsenal transfers, matches, or in this case, a extremely surprising encounter. And I say extremely surprising. I'm going into different words now. Extremely surprising encounter because the man who interviewed Josh Kroenke is the last person on earth that I would think would have got into an interview with Josh Kroenke. Now, obviously, the title of the video seemingly puts this up as it's going to be this six-figure salary journalist who's like up there in the upper echelons of true respect and fandom. But it's Mike.
I literally told you that nothing you could say mocking my journalistic integrity would offend me, but I think you've just managed to offend me.
And that's why you shouldn't have said that, because now I've perfectly showed you why not to underestimate me in any possible way.
Well, I knew that already, but hey, let's just be clear. There were 5 of us in there, so I was only
not in my mind.
20% as damaging. Yeah, you've got this mental picture. We've released the text, we've released the audio. We haven't released the video yet because I want to keep your impression that it was just Josh and I leaning in to each other, talking and having a beer.
You say there was 5 people in there, but one of the other people was Andy.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. And we're kind of as one, so maybe there was only 4 people in there.
Yeah. So can I say that this is for people who don't know Mike. Mike runs the Gooners podcast. Obviously, we've had quite a few
with Andy.
With Andy.
We're trying not to marginalize him just because he blew you up.
He deserves it. He 100% deserves that. Now, obviously, we've had a lot of new people come to the channel over the last few months or so with the regular grafting, as you like to tell me I'm doing. And obviously, you won't know that we do. Some of you won't know that we do a weekly podcast after the matches with the likes of Lee Judges, with the likes of Drew, our good friend from New York, and also Mike and Andy, our guests on the show, and come on fairly regularly when I can be asked to ask them. So you'll see Mike a lot more throughout the season as he comes on, as his view on different viewpoints. But we're here to talk about Mike's, as we've said, or in a rather comedic way. But it was a very serious conversation with Josh Kroenke. And first off, Mike, I think you deserve. Or the listeners certainly deserve to know how on earth this happened.
Well, it was probably one of the more surprising things, as you've made very clear. But just to give a little bit of background, Andy came up with an idea about 2 months ago with the tour coming up in the States, where it started in Denver, it's ending in DC. Those are the 2 cities that we're from. He comes up with some wacky ideas that usually end up being brilliant. And one of them was to try to obtain media credentials because, after all, we are media now. That was the whole joke. But, we decided to go at it on with a serious approach. And all of a sudden, about a week and a half before the games, we get our media credentials approved. So we decided to give it a try. We go to the Dick's Sporting Good Park on Monday. There's no pregame activity because the team basically flew in and flew out just for the game. So it's not your normal press junket, but we're up in the press box with a few other. I mean, it was not a crowded press box. John Cross was there. Mark Irwin was there. James Benge,
yeah, something like that.
He was there, and that was pretty much it as far as the British media and the podcast media, and the I have to tell a story. The communications person came up to us, sees me and Andy kind of like literally standing like wallflowers, like just surveying the room to make sure we didn't do anything stupid. And she comes up to us to introduce herself and says, "You guys must be the podcasters." Like, and she easily could have just said like, "You won the Make-A-Wish contest, didn't you?" I mean, like that. Like we're the people. You're the people that we let in here that we normally wouldn't have, but. Anyway, we start kind of talking to John and to James, and the director of communications for Arsenal comes up and says, we understand you guys want to talk and get some comments on this whole letter and this movement that's come out in the last 24 hours. And I think we're going to have Vinay come up and give some comments. And then he gave some off-the-record comments about it. One thing turns into another, and at halftime, they say, be back here at the halftime whistle. And in walks the entire executive team of Arsenal and KSE. Josh, Vinay, Raul,
Edu?
and Edu wasn't in the room, but the director of communications, and then kind of the lawyer / VP of KSE was in there as well. So there were 5 from
I feel
the
like he was there
Arsenal
for your
setup.
benefit.
No, but he was there for somebody's benefit, which if you listen to the audio,
Yes.
you'll be able to
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
that he was there for the benefit of making sure that Josh didn't say something that might alienate him from the British press. The British press sometimes does enough to alienate themselves, but they keep
Yeah.
getting invited back. So there was 5 of them in the room, 5 of us in the room, and before we knew it, we were off and running. And Josh just, he said, no questions off limit. I might not answer everything, but let's have it. No pre-approval. It was being reported before all the information came out that it was a group of fans, which makes it seem like, KSE said, all right, we got to do some damage control. Let's get some sympathetic fans in who are just going to be excited to be here and, put out a PR statement, essentially. That couldn't be further from what actually happened. And I've just kind of described to you how it went. It was meant to just be a controlled media thing, but without any kind of pre-announced questions or anything like that. So
let me ask you then. Obviously, you sitting in that room with those guys, and it's gone off the back basically of the hashtag We Care Do You. I mean, I'm not sure whether this would have happened if the movement had not have gone ahead. I don't know if this would have happened and been approved. You don't seemingly think from the shaking of your head that it would have done.
No, this was in response. I mean, and that's a credit to the way the organization and the statement was rolled out, because
I was going to say,
clearly in response.
The way that this movement, which I've backed and I've obviously put in the description of the videos and tweeted out and said go sign the petition, which is now I've got over 100,000 signatures on it, which is great. But do you think that they responded because the tactic that the movement has gone for is not a whole hashtag Kroenke out, because that is not the way that they want it to come across as, and that's not what they want. They want ultimately change. They want change to happen, and the approaches that the people higher up in the club are making. So do you think that is why they responded, is because of the mannerisms that the movement has gone about the way it has done its thing?
I do. I do have to say one thing, though, which is that at least some of the people, I didn't hear this from Josh, but others who are in the room are a bit exasperated about, what do they want us to do? We're doing this, we're doing that. And these are off the record comments from people who are not Josh Kroenke. But, there is somewhat of a defensive vibe saying, they're out for blood. Do they just want us to spend money or not? And I think that comes from, months and months and years of less organized approaches that are a little bit more angry and sound like temper tantrums from spoiled fans. And I'm not saying that the people who feel these things are that way. I'm saying that the way that the information has been just shouted out there, the hashtags, the Kroenke out, that has no impact on them. That's noise to them, whether it should be or not.
Because it's ultimately that isn't going to happen, is it? Then they
you're
aren't
not
going to leave the club.
You're not going to intimidate them to leave, and you're not going to intimidate them to change their approach. What you should be able to get them to do is dialogue on what's going on, be a little more open, and provide a little bit more access to the thought process in a way that isn't going to hamper our strategy in the transfer market by, if we act like Galacticos, and like that's what we're willing to do, then those are the prices we're going to have to pay. So, I mean, there is a strategy in place that's not going to change. What needs to change, in my opinion, and what I think was so beneficial about the letter, the way it was written, and the approach thus far on the We Care Do You campaign, is that it seems less about just blowing the club up and starting over in the form that fans would want it to be. Win at all costs, and more about how do we have this baton passing between Stan and Josh, and from Arsene Gazidis to Raul and Vinay and the rest, and Unai and the rest of the team. How do we just tweak that to a way where we can all see that we're on the same side?
Yeah.
And I think that had it been 100,000 signatures on an angry, foot stomping thing, you would have never seen Arsenal feel the need to respond at all. But that's a kind of a short way of saying yes. I do think it was because of the way that the letter was written, the way that the rollout of the social media campaign, if you will.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in contact with one of the signatures of the movement, Hugh Izzy, obviously come on the show, known Hugh for quite a while now, and he released a video basically going over and breaking down what he said in his, not the interview that he did with you, but the interview that went up on the Arsenal website. And the thing I took away from Hugh's breakdown of that video, that it was very much this has been pre-done, pre-ready. It was effectively scripted. Now, you've said already that you knew that any questions were pretty much welcome, that you could have asked anything you liked. You may not have got an answer for it, but there wasn't a case of you weren't shackled in any way about what you could and couldn't say. So especially I want to think about the question that Andy asked Josh, which I thought was a fantastically worded question, and he did it brilliantly, which is the only compliment I'm ever going to give Andy ever again, is that the way that he doesn't sort of give anything, and him and Stan, of course, doesn't really give anything in terms of vocalisms too often. And Andy actually said, why don't you ever come on to Arsenal Player and speak your mind and say where we're at with the club? Do you think there was any sort of strategy in obviously the sort of nothing could be spoken until 4 p.m. that day, UK time? So do you think there was any sort of tactics employed by the club in any sense to have the interview with you and then they release a video on Arsenal Player at 4 p.m. Do you think that was a coincidence, or do you think that was completely planned?
What's an interesting coincidence is how so many people knew about the 4 p.m. embargo that weren't in that room. But that
came out on Twitter very quickly.
Well, we'll skip over that. And one of the things that kicked off the whole discussion about, will Josh talk to the media, was because before the game, he did go into that same room, which was it was like a segment filming room. It was a very small room, but he was in there filming something, which I truly believe to be the video that we ended up seeing on Arsenal.com.
Yeah.
So he was in that mode. I mean, we all knew that Josh was there. We saw him walk in and out of the room, and that's when the discussion about having a sit down at halftime came to be. So it didn't surprise me that there was a video that came out because we knew he had been doing something. It became very clear at 4 o'clock when we were basically told, okay, you can release what you've got.
Yeah.
And at that moment, a video dropped on Arsenal.com that was why it was 4 o'clock. It was originally going to be earlier than that. It was originally going to be 1 o'clock, and then it got pushed to 4, and now that seems to be why. What was interesting about it is that we left that meeting with the strong impression that they felt no reason to issue a written response, a statement, or anything directly addressing the We Care Do You movement, other than answering questions from us and the video that they clearly had planned. And so the written response, the statement from Josh, was really kind of a surprise. And if you listen to Andy, and I buy into this a little bit, we think that having a written response like that was done after our discussion, hopefully maybe in response to the discussion. And perhaps that's taking too much credit for something, but that's what we're going to do here. We're just going to take credit for the whole thing. When we win the league this year, when we win the league in the next 4 years running, we're going to take credit for that.
The Gooners podcast reason why that happened.
Yeah, we're going to call it the Gooners podcast trophy when we win the treble. But back to Andy's question, he has a unique perspective, to be honest, of being English, understanding the media more than most American podcasters.
We should clarify. He was born in England.
He was born in England to English family and lived there for 7 years, and then moved to the U.S. and took extensive classes to get rid of his accent so he wouldn't sound as posh as you do.
Oh wow!
My bell is still in my suitcase, so I can't ring it.
You can't use
that. But not only does he have that perspective, but he also lives in Denver and is surrounded by Kroenke sports, quote unquote, franchises, which is what they are in the States all the time. And so he sees something that most Arsenal supporters don't, which is that he does communicate. He does have a little, some transparency, some active ownership qualities in Denver. And so the juxtaposition of that versus why do you not seem to see the importance of doing that in England to your Arsenal supporters, I think was a great question. And unfortunately, it was a question that, because of the implication that the British media like to spin things and possibly could be more threatening to put out statements to, we didn't really get an answer to that question.
I just think when we look at what actually happened in the room and we look at what happened in the statement, there are differences, aren't there? There are differences in the manner of it, I think, that it came across from listening to you when you uploaded the audio, especially when we talk about how he responded and especially how some of media outlets responded. We were talking off air, weren't we, about how certain outlets had published their what they had taken from
Wind up merchant Josh Kroenke. I mean, that's well, you don't have to like the guy, but I mean, if you're invited into a room like that and then your publication comes out starting with wind up merchant and the 5 most insulting things he said, and that's what you took from that isn't what they took from the interview. That's what they wanted to put out there to, to incite this click frenzy that they rely on. And it's, maybe we should have been the only ones in there, because if they're going to do that, I mean, that was not the tone of the interview that I took from it.
Have you come out of that interview wishing you'd asked anything different now?
Of course. I mean, we had no time to prepare anything, and I'm not really great on my feet. Andy obviously asked the best question in there and didn't get the right answer to it. I just would have probably expanded on, I asked questions that were really more of a plea just to, be more communicative, to be more transparent. Not necessarily only when it comes to finances and transfers, but in how, and how you feel about the club. It isn't self-evident, as they might think it is, that they love the club and they're in it to win it. He says that, and he said it pretty convincingly, in our meeting, but it's about, your actions throughout the year. It's about your actions over 3 or 4 years, not just, what you say in a 15-minute interview. And I think that needs to be a more consistent message. This can't be it right now. This little flash of here I am, here's what I'm about, is the beginning of something. If it ends up being the end of something, then I don't know that we've really made any progress. But I've seen a lot of questions in the chat of things that they would have liked us to ask, about how they let Arsene Wenger and Gazidis go on for so long. They know that mistakes were made. That's the impression I got.
I think that was admitted, wasn't it? Like, that was.
I mean, not, names weren't thrown out there, but basically, they're not shying away and said we did all the right things over the last 5 or 6 years. Of course, it's the corporate speak and the positive spin that really, to be fair, any ownership group would do, not just them, to say, we are where we are right now. All we need to do is try to figure out how to fix it and get it right going forward. And, you shouldn't get 20 chances to do that. But, I mean, we're coming off 22 years, the last 8 or 9 of which I think ownership was far too passive in just letting one person or one person with a second executive just really control everything. They took their eyes off the ball because they felt it was in good hands. And that is their biggest fault for the last 5 to 10 years, in my opinion. And crying about it and whining about it and being upset about it and asking them to leave is not the approach. Working with them to, and giving it time, hopefully, to turn around is where I am on the issue.
As we roll down to sort of the last 5 minutes, as obviously it's a great opportunity to speak to Josh Kroenke. It's a great, like just to think that this has been such an elusive family as Arsenal's now owners, or as they put it, custodians of the club. Is there still a little bit of, I want to use the right term, frustration that it was Josh and not Stan that did the interview? Or do you think it was very much as though this was the right person to do the interview because Josh, as he said himself, is the person taking on Arsenal? Stan is sort of an overseer, if you like, and Josh is going to be the mouthpiece.
That's an excellent question, and I'm glad you went there because I've been saying now for between Andy, who sees how the franchises are run in the States, and hopes to see more of that applied to the club in England, it isn't Stan who we need to be focused on at this point. Everybody who is, who's vilifying Stan Kroenke, who is screaming for him to do something, to say something, you're not going to get what you want. And I'm no fan of Stan Kroenke. I don't like a number of things about him, including his silence so far as ownership. But he's not the guy anymore that really is in a position to change and revolutionize and try to get back to the top. It is Josh. And I think the sooner Arsenal supporters start realizing that Josh is the person who we need to look to for these changes, and that he's the person that for really a couple of years has been working to try to make these changes, the better, because then we potentially have a partner who unfortunately has the same last name as public enemy number one.
Yeah.
But we could potentially have a partner in Josh Kroenke. It's too early to know for sure whether he's going to be Stan Part 2 or whether he's going to be, Josh 1.0. But we are, regardless of the mistakes that have been made and the ownership style of Stan Kroenke, we are about a year to a year and a half into the Josh Kroenke era, and I think that he's the one. So he's the one that should have been there. I don't know that Stan can even fake passion for Arsenal. If Josh was faking it, he did a pretty good job of it. But Stan, there would have been absolutely it would have been a shit show. Yeah, that's the official journalistic term for that, by the way.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about like sort of especially Stan's involvement, and obviously the biggest cry out is for people to say, one is spend money, one is why he's this billionaire, we're not pumping money into the club, not like a Russian oligarch that can just throw in like Abramovich, for instance. Like, we haven't got that, and I still think there's a lot of people that don't sort of understand that it's about we aren't able to just pump money in because of FFP, and we've actually shown that we've made a loss over so many seasons now.
And there are ways that, I mean, there are things that could be done, but the issue is that Arsenal and any Kroenke sports, and I don't want to use the word business, but we all know that that's how they look at it, and which is part of the problem. But they're not going to risk massive losses to chase after something that may end up turning out poorly. I mean, people say we want our Arsenal back and harken back to a day, and we do, and harken back to a day where, there wasn't this one dominating American outsider owner of the team. But when we were a club that had 50 owners with more than maybe 1%, or again, I'm going to show my ignorance over the history of ownership, but I do know that it was spread out over a considerable number of people whose shares passed through marriage, divorce, death, all of those sort of things. Yeah. But that isn't that kind of ownership will never get you a sugar daddy type of situation like people want from Manchester City, Manchester United, or Chelsea, because there's no one. You need to have a single owner, but you have to have one that's willing to just throw their money away 5 out of every 6 times they spend money, and that's just not what Arsenal's going to do. So I think the patterns and the things that we've seen out of teams like Liverpool, where they haven't just spent absolute tons of money on players, they've just made smart decisions. They brought in young, talented coaches. They've made shrewd decisions with contracts, both on the in and outside. Then that's a model that can work, in my opinion. Jeff, by the way, in the chat, and he's been commenting on the videos. Well, you don't have. No, I wish you had left that out there. There's no. I mean, I'm aware that I might sound like an American supporting an American, but that's not. That's. I'm supporting Arsenal.
I don't see it as it's not supporting though. That's the thing. I don't want this to come. I don't want us to end the interview and it's come across anything like it's supporting, because it's not. And I am still extremely frustrated and agitated with a lot that's gone down. And that's what the whole hashtag We Care Do You. It's about how Arsenal have conducted themselves and spent their money so irresponsibly, like giving staying with Arsene Wenger for as long as we did, for giving Mesut Ozil a £350,000 a week contract. Those type of outlays, and then having to turn around and obviously pay off that Arsene Wenger contract was a huge dent in the club's finances as well. So there is huge issues, and don't get me wrong, but I don't want this movement to be portrayed as a Kroenke out. And to do that, and the reason why we're conducting this interview in the way that we are, is because you don't want to say that he's gone, because ultimately we're realists and we know that isn't going to happen. He is not going to be leaving anytime soon. And so that's what the realization of the movement has done, to say that we want change. We recognize you're here, but we want things to be done differently. And so therefore that's why this has happened. And it's great because as we go full circle to the start, that's why you got to sit in a room with Josh Kroenke and discuss the things that you wanted to talk about and ask the questions that needed to be answered. And whilst maybe we didn't get the most the biggest level of clarification on many things, and there was lots of things that were put in the statement that was put out by #WeCareDoYou that wasn't actually referenced at all in the interview or in his reply on the website, which is still obviously the reason why it's going to carry on to push, because we still want answers to a lot of questions.
It's got to be the beginning of a dialogue.
Exactly. That's the biggest challenge.
And the responsibility to keep it as a dialogue and to keep it as a constructive effort is on both parties. Josh can't just sit back and say, I'm done answering questions now, and we're back to operating behind a curtain. If he does, then this thing is going to rightfully turn a little bit more. I mean, I don't know what it's going to turn because I have no role in it, but I mean, I would imagine if months go by and a year goes by and nothing's changed and there's no, evolution of the relationship between ownership and supporters, then by all means it should, turn a bit. But, on any one single issue, whether it be the transfer window, whether it be other, where I start to end up looking like a Kroenke supporter in people's eyes, which I'm not, is because I'm just preaching a little bit more patience. And yes, we've been patient for 8 years, but there's a sunk cost to some of that. It doesn't help to, in my opinion, it doesn't help to focus on what happened 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, over the last 6 or 7 or 8 years. And, I'm talking to some people in the chat. I'm talking to people I've seen on Twitter. I'm not talking to anybody who's in charge of this movement because I don't know. And it's not for me to say what this movement becomes, but I can speak on why I support it, which I do. And what struck me as I woke up at 3:00 in the morning in Denver, and saw how quickly the tweets and all that have gone out there. And I said, you know what, this is something I can absolutely get behind in every way. So, and as far as the video, the audio that we put out, yeah, I think it helps to hear the context of what he said. I think it helps because you've got spin going the opposite direction in some British newspapers where it's being made to say that he was telling the fans what their jobs were and what their jobs weren't, which isn't what he said and isn't what he meant. And you can tell that better by listening to it. And so we finally just decided, we're going to release the audio because why not? The more unbiased, unfiltered information you can get, the better you can make up your own mind. And if you have predispositions to believe one thing or another, it's not going to change it. But, information is king.
Information is key. I mean, it's the lack of information up until this point. I know I'm not saying that we've got all the information we need now, because we certainly don't. But what this has done and what this movement has done has begun, hopefully, what a lot of fans are after, and that is more of a clarification, more of a line of communication between us and the ownership. And that is one of the biggest things that we've lacked over the last decade or so, that we've desperately needed explanations for things, and the club just simply hasn't answered those questions, and it still hasn't answered a lot of the ones that we have, such as on the European Super League, for instance, and the issues that are going to come with that. But what it has done is it's opened the door ajar for us to now, and obviously on the 25th of July when there's the Q&A with the fans, is huge.
I was just about to say, next week I think there'll be an opportunity to continue that dialogue and put kind of open it wider, and it'll be interesting to see whether there's a continual kind of meeting in the middle from Kroenke ownership, or if it ends up being "Thank you for your interest in our affairs," which would be a real shame.
It's a big moment for the club, that, because like
Huge.
the follow up after, as I said, the opening of the door, is if they close it again, that would just I can't emphasize how much worse it would be then if nothing had been said at all. To open the door ajar and open this line of communication to then revert back to what we have been used to would kill off so many more possible people like myself who are beginning to sort of not trust again, but you know what I mean, like
rebooting that maybe this could
a little bit more open about this and see where it goes, and be comfortable with being a little bit more patient, even though we've been so patient so far. But the fact that this has happened, I think, has justified that patience ever so slightly, a little bit. I think there's still lots that need to be answered, as I've said already, but it has opened the door. It has allowed me to be a bit more open to possibly seeing where this could go now that they are in full ownership of the club and a lot of the responsibility that comes with that. But ultimately, that 25th of July is a big turning point. It is a big opportunity for the club to continue that dialogue, to continue to reassure the fans that they have the interest of the club and the push to win trophies and improve and get back to the level that Arsenal need to be at. But the only way to show that is with actions. It's not with words. And those actions ultimately are going to be on the pitch. And the biggest place that starts with will be transfers, of course, and bringing in people to improve the squad. So I'm going to finish off this chat with you, Mike, in saying that how confident are you that the club will now act upon the words that they've spoken, that Arsenal will end the transfer window strongly and go into a new season more prepared than they were at the start of last season?
Well, I do think we're starting to see some movement in transfers. Haven't seen the .com confirm anything yet, but I mean, it does appear, and it is pretty much echoed and confirmed by the comments made in, because I've also, as a result of this, been able to sit in the press conferences, before and after the games with Unai Emery. Have had some offhand conversations with and been around others who have been conversing with Vinai. You can't really converse with Raul, but Vinai is very open, with what he says, and it does. I think we're going to get 3 or 4 people, and they're the 3 or 4 people that everybody's talking about.
Saliba, Ceballos, possibly Everton or Zaha, and Tierney.
I would think it'll end up probably being Everton. The Zaha thing could get interesting though, because if he starts agitating for a move and going on strike and stuff.
The last few days, I've been so confident in it being Everton, but I've seen a couple of things and heard a couple of things that sort of has made me doubt that there is a genuine thing for Everton. And I'm just saying that because of things I've seen from people that I know are reliable. And they've said on social media that actually there's not even been contact made yet between the club and Everton, which I find, after what everything has happened, and Sky Sports reporting it and other people in high profiles reporting it, even in Brazil reporting it as well, the fact that there could be no contacts is a very Arsenal thing, of course, especially on social media. And I had an interesting chat.
I heard Arsene Wenger was having tea with Everton's mother, though.
Christ.
May or may not be true.
I just think that there's, obviously, for Arsenal fans, is that they forget and they get frustrated because they see other clubs get deals done, which is frustrating. And it seems that Arsenal prolong these transfers a lot longer than actually does. Transfers take a long, long time, and even for other clubs. But because we're so attached and so visually active and so focused on the story behind every single transfer rumour, it seems in our minds to psychologically prolong those stories. So when another club signs someone, we've not seen the protraction that's led up to that signing. So for us, it becomes even more frustrating that we're not getting these deals over the line. I'm going to sort of end things there. I think we couldn't have chatted about any too much more than what we've covered. And I think, Mike, that you did a massive thing for the club and the fans, and I much appreciate the questions and both you and Andy are. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, mate.
Believe me, it was my absolute pleasure, and one of those moments where you just like, what is happening right now? But I love this club. It's been a part of my life for 30 years. And, just to be able to be that close to something that matters to all of us was a dream come true. And ironically, it was with someone who I don't necessarily look up to or admire yet. Let's hope that's something in the future. But just to be able to communicate to people and please listen to the audio, read the full text. Don't rely on sound bites, because that's how we, sometimes how these problems get worse is by hearing the interpretations that others want you to have. And we have absolutely no horse in the race other than Arsenal. And so there's no possible downside to viewership, ownership. We don't care about clicks. And I mean, it just doesn't matter to us. What matters is getting the information out there so you can process it accurately. And that's what we tried to do.
100%. So I hope you've enjoyed the show, people. Obviously, you can check out Mike's podcast and where you can find that full interview, the Gooners podcast, at the Gooners podcast on Twitter. Anything else you'd like to plug, Mike, before you go?
No, just headed off to, I'm in Charlotte now. I'll be back home in DC for the Real Madrid match. So I am going to go after Asensio, my friend. If I get a sit down with Asensio, would you just take a ridiculous amount of medication? And
I can't verbalize how angry, and I mean, as long as you name drop to my favorite player of all time, he isn't that. He's just have a connection with that guy.
yeah. I mean, I physically expect you to be like packing your bags and trying to get. I mean, because Andy does have a media pass for DC, and he won't be there. So if you get plastic surgery to look like Andy, and get on a plane, you can join me. But yeah, it's been all Arsenal so far. I did sit in on the Bayern Munich presser after the game because they came first as the losing team. But I certainly going to make a point to sit, to do some Real Madrid press, and if I can get a moment with us, send me a picture so I know what he looks like, and I'll see what I can get done for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Obviously, people have been watching the tactical breakdowns. It's in a couple of my intros when we've been linked with Real Madrid players. The one day we'll be linked with him. One day, not just Liverpool or Spurs being linked to him, which is so painful when that happens.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of Ceballos conversations going on Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm sure there will. So if you've enjoyed the show, please give it a like, please subscribe. If you're watching, obviously, live, thank you for watching. If you're watching on playback, you'll be able to check out in the description the link for the petition to sign up for #WeCareDU. Over 100,000 petitions, but we don't want it to stop there. It needs to keep going, needs to keep being pushed forward to keep this dialogue open. And the 25th, we said already, it's going to be a huge day for the club. But I hope you've enjoyed what you've listened to, and you'll return to the channel for some more content daily, it seems now, with all this grafting. But we'll be back in very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.
Come on, you Gooners.